Hey, up! On your feet right now. You're filth, you know that? Street filth, plain and simple. And I'm done letting you stink up a public building full of decent people one more afternoon. No, leave the book. Don't you touch that book. Put it down where I can see your hands. You see that sign right there? Quiet study. You know who that's for? Students, real ones. The kind with a home to go to and a parent who knows where they are. Not for whatever you are. Parking yourself at my computer 6 hours a day to stay out of the cold in case what's not nailed down.
That's right, son. It is not a shelter, it's not a warming sewer, a free daycare for kids nobody's bothering to watch.
There's a new policy in this building now, and you're looking at it. And the policy is people like you don't get to live in here anymore. So gather up your trash and move along before I have to make it official.
I understand. Sir, I checked this book out. It's mine. I mean, it's the library's, but I have it checked out. It's on my card. I come here to do my homework. I'm not casing anything.
Your card, sure. Empty the bag. I'm not. I didn't take anything.
You can scan it. Everything in here is checked out. I promise. You can...
I said empty the bag.
And the boy he was saying it to, Isaiah Monroe, 16 years old, sitting at the third table from the window in the Pell Street branch with a battered blue library book under his hand, and 2 years of his whole life folded into the building around him, looked up at the security guard for a long, level moment. And then he said, very quietly, "There's 11 kids in that next room who'd stand up for me. You just can't see them from here." He was right about the book. It was checked out, on his card, like everything in his bag. But the woman who would change the next 10 minutes wasn't a rich stranger with a name on a building. And she wasn't going to walk in from a back office in a nice suit. She was a 63-year-old children's librarian named Pauline Settle. She was in the storage room 2 doors down, sorting a donation of picture books. And the only power she had in this world was 31 years of knowing exactly who belonged in this building and who didn't. She was about to use all of it. To understand why Isaiah Monroe spent 6 hours a day at the Pell Street branch, you have to understand the 2 rooms on Halverson Avenue where he lived, and the woman who held them together. Her name was Geneva Monroe, and she was Isaiah's grandmother, and she had been raising him alone since he was 4. Since the year his mother went away and didn't come back the way she'd promised, Geneva was 68, and she cleaned 3 floors of an insurance building downtown. Nights. 10 pay. M. To 6A. M. And she slept days, which is the part that mattered to Isaiah's afternoons, because their apartment was 2 rooms, a front room and a back room, and a kitchenette, between and from the time the school bell rang until the time Geneva left for her shift. She was sleeping in the back room, getting the rest her body needed to stand on a tile floor with a mop for 8 hours in the dark. And a 16-year-old boy cannot do his homework in a front room the size of a parking space, while the woman who raised him is trying to sleep 6 feet away through a thin door. He'd tried. He'd done it quiet as he could for a year. And one afternoon, Geneva had come out of the back room rubbing her eyes a full hour before her alarm, and found him hunched over a textbook by the window with the lamp off so the light wouldn't reach her, doing algebra in the gray. "How long you been sitting in the dark?" "Baby, I'm okay." "Grandma, I didn't want to wake you. You got 2 more hours." "You doing math by the streetlight?" It wasn't a question. She came and stood behind him and looked at the page he could barely see. "Your eyes gonna give out before you're 20? It's fine. I can see. Okay. It is not fine. And you cannot see. Okay. And I won't have it." She'd said it sharp, and then her voice had come down, because the sharpness was never at him. "Listen to me. You can't learn like this. And I can't sleep knowing you're out here straining your eyes so I can rest mine. That's no kind of trade." She thought a moment. "The library. Pell Street. It's warm. It's bright. They got those big tables. And they let you stay till 9. You go there after school. Let your grandmother sleep. And you go someplace a person can actually think. That's 12 blocks. Grandma, then it's 12 blocks. I walked further than that to clean. For less than nothing, your whole life. You can walk 12 blocks to make something of yourself. She'd put her hand on the back of his head. Go where you can think. Baby, that's all I want for you. A warm place to think and a clear road after. That's the whole prayer. So he went to the library. And the library became the second room of his life, the room where the thinking happened. The room with the long tables and the green lamps and the good quiet. The room that was warm in January when the radiator on Halverson knocked and gave up. He'd been going to the Pell Street branch every school day for 2 years. The staff knew him. He had a usual table, the third from the window. He had a usual computer, number 4. The only one of the 6 public terminals whose keyboard wasn't half dead, which he knew because he was the one who'd reported the other 5 and the one who'd shown the morning regulars how to jiggle the cord on number 2 so it would turn on at all. He knew the building the way you know a place that has kept you. He knew which study carol got sun at 4 o'clock. He knew the book return slot stuck if you didn't lift it. He knew Miss Pauline kept butterscotch candies in the second drawer of the children's desk and would give you one if you'd had a hard day and didn't want to talk about it. Because the other thing about Isaiah Monroe, the thing the guard could not have known and would not have cared to, was the children's room. 2 years ago, when he first started coming, Isaiah had finished his own homework early one afternoon and wandered, bored, into the bright, low-ceilinged children's section. And Miss Pauline had been trying to run her after-school reading circle alone, with 9 squirming 5-year-olds. And one little boy in the back was crying because he couldn't get his letters, and the bigger kids were laughing at him. Isaiah had sat down next to that little boy without being asked. "Hey," he'd said, quiet, just to him. "What's your name?" "Deuce," the boy had managed. Through the snot and the shame. "Douche. Okay, you know what? Deuce? I couldn't read till I was almost 8. For real. Everybody thought I was slow. That wasn't quite true. But it was the kind of lie that's really a kindness." And the boy had stopped crying long enough to look at him. "It's not slow. The letters just move around till somebody slows them down for you. Here, put your finger right under this word with mine. We're not going to rush. We got all the time in the world." And he'd gone slow. His finger and the boy's finger together under each word. And the bigger kids had stopped laughing because there was nothing to laugh at anymore. And by the end of the hour, Deuce had read a whole page out loud. And his face when he finished that wide-open astonishment of a child who just found out he could do the thing he was sure he couldn't was a thing Isaiah would chase for the next 2 years. Miss Pauline had watched the entire thing over the top of her glasses and said nothing. The next afternoon, she'd just left an empty chair next to her at the little table, and looked at Isaiah, and tipped her head toward it. "You want me to? I want you to sit down," she'd said. "You've got the thing I can't teach the part-timers. You go slow, and you don't make them feel small. Sit down, Mr. Monroe." And he'd filled that chair every afternoon since. He tutored the little ones. That's what he did at the library. The part nobody put on a form. From 4 to 5, every school day. 16-year-old Isaiah Monroe sat in a too-small chair in the children's section and taught the neighborhood's 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds to read the ones whose parents worked, the same kind of nights Geneva did. The ones who got dropped at the library because it was free and warm and safe. The exact kind of kid he had been. A leavin' of them. That semester, he knew all their names and which ones needed glasses. Nobody had gotten them yet, and which one only ate. If you reminded him, there were crackers in his backpack. They called him Mr. Zay. They fought over who got to sit next to him. He never once thought of it as anything but the best hour of his day. A typical afternoon went like this. 4 o'clock. The kids dropped one by one as their grown-ups rushed off to shifts. And they'd find their spots on the round rug. And Isaiah would pull the too-small chair into the circle and crack his knuckles like he was about to do something serious. Which made them laugh every single time. All right. Priya. What's the rule? No rushing, Priya would say. 6 years old, and certain. No rushing. Douche. What's the other rule? We don't laugh when somebody gets stuck, Deuce would say. Because 2 years ago, he'd been the one who got stuck, and now he guarded that rule like a sheriff. We don't laugh when somebody gets stuck. Because what happens when you get stuck? Somebody slows it down for you. The whole circle would chant the way they'd learned it, and then they'd read, slow, fingers under the words. And when little Marcus hit a word too big and his lips started to go, Isaiah would lean in and say, Hey, look at me. You're not stuck. You're just at the part right before. Sound out the front of it? Just the front. And Marcus would get the front, and then the rest would tumble out. And Isaiah would hold up a hand for a high five and say, There it is. There's the whole word. You had it the whole time. And Marcus would sit up 2 inches taller. And that, right there, the 2 inches, that was the thing Isaiah did it for. He couldn't have told you it was teaching. It just felt like handing kids the thing nobody had handed him fast enough, and watching them grow into it in real time. That was the hour Royce Doyle had decided to end. And he did all of it, the homework, the tutoring, the staying warm, the staying out of his grandmother's sleep, out of one plane engine that had nothing to do with anybody dying and everything to do with somebody living. Geneva Monroe had cleaned other people's buildings for 30 years, so her grandson wouldn't have to. And Isaiah was going to be the first person in the history of his family to go to college. And he was going to do it so that someday Geneva could sit down. That was the whole of it. That was the dream. Plain as a glass of water, get the grades. Get the scholarship. Get the degree. Get his grandmother off her feet before those feet gave out. He kept the dream in a thick, battered library book with a blue cover. A book about the men and women who built the first telescopes that he'd checked out so many times. Miss Pauline had finally stopped making him return it and just kept it behind her desk with a sticky note that said, Zays. He wanted to build things. Instruments. He wanted to be an engineer. The blue book was the closest thing he owned to a map of where he was going. And he read it the way some people pray. That was the boy, a man named Royce Doyle, called street filth, and told to empty his bag. Royce Doyle was 55, and he wore a uniform that was designed on purpose to be mistaken for a police uniform from a distance. And he liked it that way. He worked for a private security company called Sentinel, and Sentinel had been hired by the county 3 weeks earlier, under a budget line some commissioner had pushed through about patron safety and asset protection at branch libraries. Which was the kind of phrase that gets written by people who have never needed a library to be warm. Doyle had spent 20 years applying to be a real police officer and had never made it past the psych eval. A fact he had buried so deep that the burying had become his whole personality. The security job was the closest he would ever stand to the authority he'd wanted his entire life. And he guarded that closeness ferociously. And the way he proved to himself that he had power was to find the people in the building with the least of it and make them feel it. He had a habit, when he was deciding whether someone was a problem, of clicking the button on his heavy flashlight. On and off. On and off. A little click-click against his palm. A cop's flashlight. On a man who would never be a cop. He'd been told by his supervisor to reduce loitering. He had decided, in his first week, that loitering had a face. And the face was a quiet black teenager who sat at the same table every day. And he had been building toward this afternoon since the day he started. It hadn't started all at once. That's never how it starts. The first week, it was just a look, Doyle standing at the end of Isaiah's aisle, a beat too long. Clicking that flashlight. The second week it was, "You got a library card, or you just like the heat?" And Isaiah had shown the card. Polite. And Doyle had looked at it like it might be counterfeit and handed it back. Then it was. "How come you're always here? Don't you got someplace to be?" And Isaiah had said, "I'm doing my homework, sir." And Doyle had said, "Ooh," in the voice that means "I'm watching you," and walked off slow so the boy would feel the eyes on his back. Isaiah had told himself it was nothing. He'd told himself men like that get bored. He'd made himself smaller and quieter and more polite. The way you do. Hoping smaller and quieter and more polite would be enough. It is never enough. The contempt was never about anything Isaiah did. It was about what Doyle needed Isaiah to be so that Doyle could feel like somebody. And a boy cannot behave his way out of another man's need. What you've already heard is what he'd decided. There were others in the branch. A retired man named Mr. Abernathy, who came every day to read 4 newspapers front to back, and who had lowered his paper and gone very still. A young mother at the catalog computers with a stroller, who pulled the stroller a few inches closer to herself. A college student in headphones who took one earbud out, registered the temperature of the thing happening, and put it back in. Because she had a paper due and no room in her life for someone else's trouble. And through the wide doorway to the bright children's room, 11 small heads that had begun, un by un, to turn. "I'm not going to ask you again," Doyle said. "The bag. Open it, or I escalate this." And Isaiah Monroe, who had done nothing wrong, who had a card and a checked-out book, and 2 years of being the best thing about that building, did a calculation that no 16-year-old should be fluent in. The calculation of how to make yourself small enough and slow enough and unthreatening enough that a man with a badge-shaped thing on his chest does not get to call you the next word. He set both hands flat on the table where they could be seen. He kept his voice even. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Sir, I'm going to open the bag now. I'm going to use my right hand. There's a textbook, a notebook, a pencil case, and 1 library book that's checked out on my card. That's everything." And he opened the bag the way you'd diffuse something. Slow. Narrating it. And Doyle reached in and pulled out the 1 library book that wasn't the blue one. A paperback Isaiah had checked out that morning for a paper and held it up like he'd found a body. "This checked out?" "Yes, sir. This morning? It'll be in the system. You can scan it at the desk. It'll show my card." "Funny," Doyle said, "because we've had books going missing from this branch for a month. A whole month of inventory walking out the door. And here's a kid with a bag full of books and no good reason to be here." He clicked the flashlight. Click. Click. "I think you're the reason. I think I just caught the reason." It was a lie. Or it was a guess, so lazy. It amounted to one, there was no rash of missing books. There was only a man who needed this boy to be guilty of something, but it landed in the quiet of the library like a stone through glass. Because an accusation does not need to be true to do its work. It only needs to be said in front of people. And Isaiah felt it land. Felt the young mother's eyes move to him and away. Felt the word thief settle onto his shoulders in a building where, an hour ago, he had been Mr. Zay. Behind the newspaper rack, Mr. Abernathy lowered his paper an inch. "Now hold on," the old man started. "That boy comes in here every single..." "Sir." Doyle didn't even turn his head. "You want to make yourself part of a security matter. I can make it your matter. Otherwise, stay in your chair and read your paper." And Mr. Abernathy, 79 and alone and reliant on this branch, for most of the human contact in his days, raised the paper back up, slow, ashamed. And the shame of it would sit on him all night, which was the precise calculation a man with a uniform counts on. That most people will weigh the cost of speaking and find it just a little too high. The whole room learned the lesson in real time. Stay down. Stay quiet. This is what happens to people who don't. I didn't take any books, he said, and for the first time his voice was not quite level. I have never taken anything from this library. 2 years. You can look at my whole record. Every book I ever checked out and brought back. You can ask anybody who works here. Ask Miss Pauline. Please. Just ask somebody before you. Miss Pauline's not here, Doyle said, which he believed, because he'd seen her go into the back. It's just you and me and the truth. Champ. And the truth is, you've been treating this building like your personal living room for too long. And today's the day that ends. Now you can walk out of here on your own. And we forget the books. Or I can file a report and you can be a 16-year-old with a theft complaint on his name. You think about how that follows you. You think about what that does to whatever little plan you've got. He leaned down. Close. So the next part was just for Isaiah. The cruelty of it, private and precise. Kids like you don't have plans anyway. You've got an afternoon to kill and a warm room to kill it in. And you've decided that makes you somebody. It doesn't. Now, get your trash and get gone. Here is where it almost ended. The way it ends 10,000 times that nobody ever hears about. Isaiah Monroe started packing his bag. His hands were shaking, and he hated that they were shaking. And he packed slow and careful because if he packed slow and careful, he wouldn't cry. And he reached behind the children's desk where it sat in its usual spot and took the blue book. Zay's on the sticky note. And Doyle said, leave that. That's the library's. And Isaiah said, Miss Pauline lets me keep it here. It's checked out. And Doyle took it out of his hands, took the blue book out of the boy's hands, and turned it over, and read the sticky note. Zay's. He said it like it was evidence, too. You wrote your name on library property now? He flipped it open. To the middle, where the photographs were, the homemade telescopes. The people who'd built the impossible out of junk, and he looked at the pictures and then at the boy in the second-hand coat. And he laughed. Short and ugly. What's this? Your big plan? Telescopes. He let the words sit there to die. Let me tell you something. For free. Because nobody else will. A kid like you doesn't end up in a book like this. You end up exactly where you're standing in a building you don't pay for, holding a dream you read about. Until somebody like me tells you it's closing time. Do yourself a favor and put the book down before you embarrass yourself any worse. And Isaiah stood there with empty hands in the building that had kept him for 2 years. The blue book in a stranger's grip, about to be walked out the front door as a thief in front of everyone. And he did the math, the disrespected do faster than anyone, that this was not winnable. That staying cost more than leaving, and he picked up his bag to go. And that was the moment a 5-year-old named Deuce walked out of the children's room. Deuce was the one who'd been crying 2 years ago over his letters. Deuce was the one who read a whole page now. Deuce had wandered to the doorway with a picture book still open in his hands, drawn by the sound of Mr. Zay's voice going wrong. And he stood there in the wide doorway in light-up shoes and looked at the man holding Mr. Zay's blue book. And he said, in the enormous, clear voice of a child who does not yet know you're supposed to be quiet about the truth, "Why are you being mean to Mr. Zay? He's the one who teaches us to read." The whole library heard it. And then, and this is the part Royce Doyle never saw coming. Because men like Doyle never count the people. They've decided don't count the rest of them came. Not all at once. First, a little girl named Priya, 6, who came and stood next to Deuce and took his hand. Then 2 more. Then the whole reading circle, 11 of them, drawn out of the bright room by the gravity of their Mr. Zay in trouble. Until there was a small crowd of very small people standing in the doorway between Doyle and the door, looking up at a grown man with their faces open and confused and certain, the way only children are certain, that a mistake was being made. And behind them, drawn by the silence where her reading circle's noise should have been, came Pauline Settle. She was 63 years old and 5 feet tall, and she had worked in this building since Royce Doyle was in high school. And she took in the whole scene in one sweep. The boy with empty hands and wet eyes, the guard with the blue book. The children ringed in the doorway, and something came over her that the regulars at Pell Street had seen exactly twice in 31 years. And both times, somebody had ended up apologizing. Royce. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Put the boy's book down and step away from my reading circle. Ma'am, this doesn't concern. Everything that happens to a child in this building concerns me. That is the entire job. Put the book down. And Doyle, who had a foot and 100 pounds on her, found that he had put the book down. Because 31 years of standing in the right has a weight to it that a fake badge does not. Now, Pauline said, you want to tell me what's happening here? Or should I let Deuce tell me? Since he seems to have the clearest head in the room? This individual, Doyle said, recovering, reaching for the uniform in his voice, has been loitering. And we've had theft. And I have reason to believe this individual, Pauline said, is named Isaiah Monroe. He has had a library card at this branch since he was 14. He has checked out, by my rough count, something north of 400 books, and returned every last one, most of them early. He runs my early reader circle 5 days a week. For free, better than the paid part-timers I can't keep. And the reason 11 children in this branch are reading at or above their grade level is sitting right there with his hands shaking because you put them there. She turned to the room, to Mr. Abernathy and the young mother and the student, now with both earbuds out. Has anyone in 2 years seen this boy take one single thing that wasn't his? Silence. And then Mr. Abernathy lowered his newspaper the rest of the way and said, I've watched that young man hold the door for every soul that comes through it for 2 years. You picked the wrong child. Officer. And the young mother said, Quiet. He helped me carry the stroller up the steps last week. I didn't even ask. And it started to move through the room. The small corrections. The record assembling itself out of a dozen ordinary mornings nobody had thought to write down, and that the gathering of all those small true things was worth more than any camera. Because it came from people who had simply paid attention. The college student had both earbuds out now. He showed me how to get the printer to work my first week. She said, to nobody. To everybody. I never even asked his name. I'm sorry I had my headphones in. The young mother with the stroller nodded. And little Priya, still holding Deuce's hand, looked up at the big man with the flashlight and said the thing only a child would think to say. The thing that went under everybody's ribs at once. Are you the one who took the books? Because Mr. Zay didn't take the books. Mr. Zay gives books. She held up the picture book in her free hand. As evidence. He gave me this one to practice. Doyle looked down at 11 children and a picture book held up as evidence. And for 1 second, something moved behind his face that might have been the man he could have been. And then it was gone. Because it is easier to double down than to feel that, and here is the killer line. It came from Isaiah. He had wiped his face with the heel of his hand. And he picked the blue book back up off the desk. And he looked at Doyle. And his voice came back level. And what was in it was not anger. Which was worse than anger. You know what this building is? He said. It's the one place in this whole city that's supposed to belong to everybody. That's the whole idea of it. You don't need money. You don't need a house. You don't need anybody to vouch for you. You just walk in. And it's yours. Same as anybody's. And you looked around the one building in the city that belongs to everybody. And you decided the one person it shouldn't belong to is a kid who's got nowhere else to go. He held the book against his chest. You didn't catch me stealing. There's nothing to catch. You caught me having nowhere else to be. And you decided that was the crime. That's not a mistake about a book. That's a decision about a boy. And you made it the second you saw me, before I opened my mouth. That's the line. It stood by itself in the quiet of that library, and didn't need a thing around it. And right on time, because men like Doyle cannot help themselves. Doyle looked from the children to the librarian to the old man with the newspaper, felt the room turn under his feet, and reached for the only thing he had left. Look, if I'd known the kid was one of the good ones, one of the ones that helps out, I never would have. No, Pauline said. And she said it gently, which was the worst of it, because it meant she was sad for him. No. Royce, listen to what you just said. One of the good ones. You think your mistake was sorting him into the wrong pile? Your mistake was that you've got piles. You walked into a library, and looked at a poor child with nowhere warm to go, and decided that a boy with nowhere to go is the same thing as a boy up to no good. It is not. It has never been. The whole reason this building exists, the whole reason there's a free warm room with books in it on Pell Street, is for the child who has nowhere else. He is not the exception to who this place is for. He is exactly who it's for. She put her hand on Isaiah's shoulder. You didn't fail to spot a good kid. You failed to understand the front door. For a moment, nobody in the branch said anything at all. Then Pauline did the thing that ended it. She turned her back on Royce Doyle, which from a 5-foot woman to a man with a flashlight was its own kind of verdict. And she crouched down to the ring of children in the doorway, knees cracking, and said, in the bright, easy voice she used for story time, "All right, my readers. Who wants to walk Mr. Zay back to the children's room and show him the new books that came in? I think Deuce should lead, since he was brave first, and 11 kids cheered like it was a parade, and took Isaiah by both hands and by the hem of his coat, and towed him away from the man who'd called him filth and back into the bright, low-ceilinged room that had always actually been his. And that was the picture the whole branch was left with. Not a guard's authority, but a boy being pulled to safety by a tide of small children who had decided, without a single adult's permission, exactly whose side the truth was on. Doyle stood by the third table from the window with his flashlight in his hand, and nobody left to point it at. Now let me tell you how it came down. Because in a story like this, you don't get to skip the part where the scales come level. You earned it. So did Isaiah. So did 11 5-year-olds in light-up shoes who walked toward trouble instead of away from it, which is more than most grown men can manage. But first, the part that almost wrecked it, because it's the truest part, and the easy version leaves it out. Royce Doyle did not slink away when Pauline finished. Men who have built their whole selves out of a uniform do not surrender the uniform in front of an audience. He went back to the Sentinel office that night, and he did the thing he'd threatened. He filed the report. Theft. Suspected. Repeated. Subject uncooperative. Recommend trespass. And here is the part that ought to make you sit forward. The system believed him first, because that is how it works. A man in a uniform files a paper, and the paper has the weight of the institution behind it. And the boy has only the truth. And the truth does not come on letterhead. By the next afternoon, there was a trespass notice with Isaiah Monroe's name on it taped to the inside of the Pell Street front desk. And a 16-year-old who had never taken a thing in his life was, on paper, banned from the one building that had kept him. He didn't tell his grandmother. That was the part that nearly broke him, not the ban. But sitting across the kitchenette from Geneva that night, watching her get ready for her shift, and not being able to make his mouth say that he'd been called a thief and put out of the library, because she had built her whole tired life on the belief that her grandson was somewhere safe and warm and good while she mopped floors in the dark. And he could not be the one to take that from her. "You're quiet tonight," Geneva had said, pinning her name tag on. "Something happened at school?" "No." "Ma'am, just tired." She'd looked at him a beat too long. The way she did. The look that had caught every lie he'd ever told from the time he was small. But she'd let it go. Because she had a bus to catch. And at the door, she'd said, "There's beans on the stove. Library let out, okay?" And Isaiah had heard himself say, "Yeah, it was fine." And the word fine had tasted like ash. And Geneva had gone off into the night, believing her boy had spent the afternoon somewhere warm and good. So he sat in the front room that night, with the lamp off after she left, with nowhere to go and nowhere to think. And he held the blue book. He still had the blue book. Pauline had pressed it into his hands before he left, and for the first time in 2 years, Isaiah Monroe thought maybe the man was right. Maybe the plan was a thing kids like him made up to get through the afternoon. Maybe there was no version of the world where the boy on the trespass notice became the man in the blue book. He opened the book to the photographs in the middle. The homemade telescopes. The people who'd ground their own lenses out of nothing. And for once it didn't feel like a map. It felt like somebody else's country. That's the part the feel-good version skips. How close it comes. How a single sheet of paper from a man with a flashlight can outweigh 2 years of a good boy's life. For a day. For 2 days. Long enough to make him doubt the only thing keeping him moving. What turned it was not a hero with a checkbook. It was the children's parents. It started in the children's room. The day after. At 4 o'clock. Miss Pauline tried to run the circle herself. The way she had before Isaiah. And the kids sat on the round rug and stared at the empty too-small chair. And deuce 7 now. The sheriff of the rules said, "Where's Mr. Zay?" "Mr. Zay can't come for a little while." "Baby," Pauline said, because she would not lie to a child, and she would not hand a child the whole ugly truth either. "Did he do something bad?" "No," Pauline said, very steady. The way her voice gets when she's holding something down. "He did not do one single thing bad. Somebody made a mistake about him. And the grown-ups are going to fix it." "When?" "Soon as I can make them." Because the 11 kids went home and did what children do. Which is tell the truth at the dinner table without strategy. A man was mean to Mr. Zay and said he was bad, and now Mr. Zay can't come anymore, and who's going to do reading circle? And those parents, night shift parents, 2-job parents, parents who knew exactly what it was to be looked at and sorted and decided about those parents, got on the phone. They called the branch. They called the head of the county library system. One mother, Priya's mother, who worked the register at a pharmacy and had maybe never written a complaint in her life. Wrote 3 paragraphs that ended, "My daughter could not read in September. She reads to me now at night." The young man who did that has been called a thief and put out of the library. By a guard. And I want to know what kind of place does that to the best thing in it. And Pauline Settle, who had 31 years and no fear left to lose. Walked the boy's entire library record, and the children's reading progress logs into the office of the library director and laid them on the desk. What am I looking at? "Pauline, you're looking at 400 and some books checked out and returned. Every one. By the boy your Sentinel Guard banned for theft yesterday. And you're looking at 11 children's reading levels. September to now. Taught by that same boy. For free. Because I couldn't keep a paid part-timer in that chair if my life depended on it. She put down a third sheet. And this is my retirement letter. It's not filled in yet. It will be by 5 o'clock. And I will walk it and the rest of these straight to every reporter in this city who'll take my call. Before I let that trespass notice sit on my front desk one more day with that child's name on it. The director was a woman named Carol Okafor, who had spent her career fighting for branch budgets in a county that kept trying to cut them. And she read the file. And she made 3 phone calls while Pauline sat there. And somewhere in the second call, her voice changed into the voice of a person correcting an injustice done in her own name. Put your letter away. Pauline, she said when she hung up. Nobody's retiring. The notice is coming down within the hour. And the guard, she pinched the bridge of her nose. The guard is going to wish he'd never heard the word library. The trespass notice came down within the hour. Sentinel's contract for the Pell Street branch was reviewed and, within the month, not renewed, not because a rich man snapped his fingers, but because a director with a spine and a stack of parent letters and a librarian willing to burn her own retirement made it impossible to keep. Royce Doyle was reassigned, then let go. And the last anyone heard, he was guarding a parking structure where there was no one left to sort. He wasn't a cartoon. He was a man who'd wanted to matter so badly that he'd made a boy matter less, so he could feel it. But wanting to matter explains a thing without excusing it. And he'd had a choice every time he clicked that flashlight. And he'd made the same one every time. The day the notice came down, Pauline called the apartment and told Isaiah to come back. And he walked the 12 blocks, not quite believing it. And when he came through the front door of the Pell Street branch, the children's room must have had a lookout. Because before he was 3 steps in, there was a sound like a small stampede. And 11 kids came around the end of the stacks at a dead run and hit him about knee height all at once. And Deuce was yelling, "Mr. Zay's back." Mr. Zay's back, loud enough that for once nobody shushed anybody. And Isaiah Monroe stood just inside the front door of the building that had been taken from him and given back, with a pile of small children hanging off both arms, and had to put his face down into the top of Deuce's head for a second so the whole library wouldn't see a 16-year-old cry. Mr. Abernathy lowered his newspaper and, this time, did not raise it again. He just nodded. Once. The nod of a man squaring an old debt with himself. Behind the desk, Pauline Settle watched the whole thing over the top of her glasses and said nothing, the way she'd said nothing 2 years before, and went back to her shelving with the particular satisfaction of a person who has been right about somebody for a long time. Mr. Abernathy, the man with the newspapers, became something he hadn't planned on. He'd gone home that first day sick with how long it had taken him to lower his paper. And he came back the next morning and asked Pauline if the boy needed anyone to sit with the reading circle while things got sorted out. And it turned out a retired man who'd read 4 newspapers a day for a decade had a great deal of time and a surprisingly good gift for voices. And he never really stopped. The young mother with the stroller started bringing coffee for the desk. None of them were heroes. They were just people who had watched something and decided, a day late, that a day late was better than never, and showed up. And Isaiah. Here's what they did. And here's why I'll tell anybody who will listen that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the room you kept ends up keeping you. Nobody wrote Isaiah Monroe a check. There was no foundation. No scholarship named after anyone. No plaque. What there was a librarian who had spent 31 years learning where every kind of help in the city was hidden, and who now aimed all of it at one boy. Pauline Settle knew about the fee waivers for the college entrance exams, which Isaiah had assumed he couldn't take. She knew which application coach at the main branch did it for free on Saturdays. She knew the engineering summer program at the state university that took a handful of low-income kids every year. All costs covered. And that took them on exactly the kind of essay a boy who taught 5-year-olds to read in a free, warm room could write in his sleep. She knew, because knowing where the doors are and who they're really for is the actual job of a librarian. And always has been, long before it was about books. Isaiah took the entrance exam on a fee waiver and scored high enough that the coach at the main branch made him take it again to be sure. And it wasn't a fluke. The coach was a retired math teacher named Mr. Reyes who ran free Saturday sessions in a basement meeting room. And when Isaiah's second score came back, he slid it across the table and said, "You want to tell me why a kid who scores like this thought he couldn't afford to take the test? Because I couldn't," Isaiah said. "Afford it. Till Miss Pauline found the waiver." Mr. Reyes looked at the score again, and then at the boy. "Where do you do your studying? You don't have to tell me." "The library. Pell Street. After school till 9. "Every day?" "Every day. 2 years." And Mr. Reyes had nodded slow, the way teachers nod when a thing makes sense to them, and said, "I've been doing this a long time. You know what the kids who make it out have in common? It's not the smart. They're smart all over this city going nowhere. It's that somewhere along the line they found a warm room and somebody in it who believed them. That's the whole secret. You found yours early." He capped his pen. "Now let's talk about which schools, because you're aiming too low, son. And I'm going to fix that today." He got into the summer engineering program. And then, a year later, into the state university's engineering school, on enough aid to make it real. The first person in the history of his family to go, he worried, the way you do, about leaving Geneva, about the cost, about whether a kid who'd been on a trespass notice could really become the man in the blue book. And there was a night near the end of senior year when it all felt too big, and he sat in the Pell Street branch at his usual table, the third from the window, and put his head down. And Pauline Settle sat down across from him. And she didn't tell him it would be okay. She told him something else. "You want to know why I do this job?" she said. 63 years old. Branch hours. County pay. You ever wonder? Isaiah looked up. "Because when I was your age," Pauline said, "I had a back room I couldn't think in, and a grandmother who worked nights, same as you. And there was a library. And a woman who ran the children's desk. And she let me sit in the empty chair next to her, same as I let you. And she pointed me at every door I didn't know was there. I have spent 31 years being her. For whoever walked in needing what I needed. You're not the first, Zay. You won't be the last. But you're mine." She tapped the blue book on the table between them. "Now quit putting your head down on my table. The men in this book didn't build telescopes by quitting on the hard part. Go on home. Let your grandmother sleep. And come back tomorrow and be somebody. That's the rent on the chair." He went. He came back. He became somebody. The day the acceptance came, a real letter. The state university. The engineering school. Enough aid printed right there in the second paragraph to make it possible. Isaiah read it 3 times standing at the mailbox before he trusted it. And then he ran the 12 blocks home. The actual 12 blocks his grandmother had told him he could walk to make something of himself. And he was there at the kitchenette table with the letter when Geneva woke up for her shift. "What's that face?" she said, still half in sleep. "Good face or bad face?" "I can't tell with you." He couldn't talk. He just slid the letter across the table. Geneva Monroe read it slow, the way she read everything important. Her finger going under the words, the way her grandson's finger went under words. For the little ones, and when she got to the second paragraph, she put her hand flat on her chest and sat down hard in the kitchen chair. And she didn't say anything for a long moment. And then she said, "Read me the part with your name on it. Out loud. I want to hear it in your voice." And Isaiah read it. "Dear Isaiah Monroe, we are pleased." And his grandmother closed her eyes and listened to her grandson, read his own future out loud at the kitchen table. The first in the family. And when he finished, she opened her eyes and they were wet, and she said, 30 years I cleaned other folks' buildings, so you'd never have to, and you're going to go build them instead. She reached across and held his face in her two tired hands. Baby, you did it. You did the whole thing. And then, because she was Geneva, now go put the beans on. College man, I still got a shift. And before he left for the university that fall, he went back to the children's room. Because, of course he did. The little ones had heard he was leaving, and they'd made him cards crayon telescopes. Mostly. Lopsided stars. Mr. Zay, in 11 kinds of backwards letters, and deuce. Who was 7 now and reading chapter books. Who had been the crying boy in the back 2 years before. Handed his overlast and said, very seriously, I'm going to do the reading circle now. Miss Pauline said I could help the little ones. Like you did me. Yeah, Isaiah said, and had to look at the ceiling for a second. You remember the rules? No rushing, Deuce said. And we don't laugh when somebody gets stuck, 'cause somebody slows it down for you. Because somebody slows it down for you, Isaiah said. That's the whole thing. Man, that's everything. And he gave the boy a high five. The same one he'd been giving these kids for 2 years. The one that said, there it is. You had it the whole time. The blue book, the battered one about the people who built the first telescopes. Zay's on the sticky note. Pauline pulled it out of the system the week before he left for the university. Marked it, withdrawn from the collection the way they do with old worn copies. And gave it to him. Finally, the first book he ever owned. You can't do that, he'd said. That's library property. That's literally what started the whole thing. It was library property. Now it's withdrawn, worn beyond circulation. Says so in the system. I typed it myself. She'd pressed it into his hands. A library's whole job is to get the right book into the right hands and trust it to do its work out there. This is me doing my job. Take your book. Mr. Monroe. She'd written something on the inside cover in a librarian's careful hand. For Isaiah, who understood the front door better than the man guarding it. Come back and tell the next one. He keeps it on his desk in the engineering dorm, where it is the closest thing he owns to a map of where he's going. There was a night his first semester. There's always a night when the work was too hard, and the other kids seemed to have started miles ahead of him, and the old voice came back. The one with a flashlight in it. The one that said, kids like you don't end up in a book like this. And Isaiah Monroe sat at his dorm desk at 2 a.m. and opened the blue book to the inside cover and read what Pauline had written there. For Isaiah, who understood the front door better than the man guarding it. And then he did what he'd never have done. At 16, he called home, even that late, because Geneva would just be coming off her shift. What's wrong? Baby, she said, before hello. Because a call at that hour is never nothing. Nothing's wrong. It's hard. Grandma, I think maybe I'm not... Stop. She said it the way she'd said it the day she sent him to the library. You listen to me. You are sitting in a dormitory at a university. The first Monroe ever to do it. On a scholarship you earned with your own mind. And you're calling me at 2 a.m. to tell me you don't belong there? He could hear her sitting down. Tired. Sure, a man with a flashlight told you that once. You gonna let him be right? After a whole room full of people stood up and told him he was wrong? After 11 babies walked across a library to say you were good? No, ma'am. No, ma'am is right. The hard part is just the part right before. You taught that to those children. I heard you say it 100 times. Now you say it to yourself. A pause. You got that book there? The blue one? It's right here. Then you've got everything you need. Go to sleep. Build something tomorrow. And she'd hung up. Because the floors don't mop themselves, and the boy had a class in the morning. And Isaiah had closed the blue book and gone to sleep. And in the morning, he had not quit. On the school breaks, he comes home to the 2 rooms on Halverson. And he goes by the Pell Street branch. And he sits in the 2 small chair in the children's room. And the little ones there are new ones now. There are always new ones. Fight over who gets to sit next to Mr. Zay. And Geneva Monroe knows the whole story now. He told her the day the trespass notice came down. All of it. The word the man used, and the children in the doorway, and the librarian who threatened to burn her own retirement. And Geneva had listened with her coat half on for her shift. And at the end, she'd held her grandson's face in her 2 hands. The hands that had cleaned other people's buildings for 30 years. And she'd said, "Baby, they put your name on a paper that said you were nothing." And a whole room full of people who actually know you stood up and said different. She'd kissed his forehead. You remember that the next time you doubt yourself. It takes one man with a flashlight to write the lie. It takes a whole room who paid attention to tell the truth. You make sure you're always in the room that pays attention. And then she'd gone to work. Because the floors don't mop themselves. But she'd gone to work lighter. The way you walk when you finally get to set something down. The Pell Street branch never got another sentinel guard. What it got, after the parents kept showing up to the county budget meetings, was a small thing with no name on it and no slogan. The branch hours got extended an extra hour on school nights. And the back corner by the window, the one that gets the 4 o'clock sun, the one that was always Isaiah's, got a hand-lettered sign that Pauline made herself and laminated, the kind of sign a librarian makes. Not a marketing department. It doesn't have anybody's name on it. It just says, "This is the quiet study room. It is for anyone who needs a warm place to think." That means you. And the kids who come in off the cold with nowhere else to go sit there and do their homework under the green lamps. And most of them never know that the sign was made for a boy who got called filth at the 3rd table from the window and grew up to build instruments and understood the front door. I want to be honest with you. This is a story. Isaiah Monroe isn't a real boy. The blue book and the laminated sign were never in a real branch. I made them up. But I did not make up the man with the flashlight who decides. In 4 seconds. That a kid with nowhere to go is a kid up to no good. And you didn't think I did. Because you've seen him, maybe not in a library, but somewhere, somebody with a sliver of authority and a deep need to feel it. Aiming it down at the safest target in the room and calling it policy. Maybe you've been the student with the earbuds, taking one out, hearing it, putting it back in because you had your own paper due. Most of us have been that student at least once. That's the whole reason it keeps happening. It counts on a room full of people with their earbuds in. So here's the only question that matters. And I'd love to read your answer below. When it's your library, your bus, your ordinary afternoon when somebody with a little power decides the quiet kid in the corner is filth, are you going to keep your earbuds in? Or are you going to be the 5-year-old in the light-up shoes who walks toward the trouble and says the plain true thing out loud? Be the one who lowers the newspaper. Be the one who walks toward it. You don't need a badge or a checkbook or a name on a building. You just need to be in the room that pays attention. And then actually pay attention. And if this got to you even a little, share it. Send it to someone who needs reminding that the warm room with the books in it was always meant for the kid with nowhere else. And subscribe, because there's another one of these coming. And somebody out there needs to hear that one sheet of paper can write the lie, but a whole room that paid attention can tell the truth. This story is fiction, but the front door is real. All over this country, there are kids whose only quiet, warm, safe place to think is a public library. And there are people who'd rather those kids weren't there, and there are budgets that agree with them. The library is one of the last buildings we've got that belongs to everybody. No money, no house, no one to vouch for you. You just walk in and it's yours. Guard that idea, because the child it matters most for is exactly the one who looks to the wrong eyes, like he doesn't belong. He's not the exception to who it's for. He's the whole reason it's there. The warm room with the books was always meant for the kid with nowhere else. Especially him.